The elevator doors opened on the 32nd floor, and the first thing Ethan Calloway noticed was the champagne. It was everywhere, flutes balanced on trays carried by servers in white gloves, bottles sweating in ice buckets along the window ledges, the pale gold liquid catching the light from the city below. Outside, rain dragged itself down the floor-to-ceiling glass in slow, crooked lines. Inside, the air smelled like money, the particular combination of catered salmon, expensive cologne, and carpet that had never known a scuff mark. Ethan stood at the elevator threshold for exactly 1 second too long. He was holding a delivery bag, insulated black nylon, the logo of a third-party app printed on the side in orange letters. His jacket was the kind that had once been waterproof and no longer was. His boots had a crease across the left toe from the way he'd been walking since the heel insert compressed. He was 36 years old, and he looked, in the reflection of the elevator's brushed steel interior, like a man who had made some choices he could not take back. He stepped out. The hostess at the check-in table near the elevator bank looked up from her tablet. She was perhaps 24, wearing a blazer in a shade of dusty rose that matched the accent wall behind the bar. Her expression processed him in the way that expensive spaces process people who don't belong. Not quite hostility, not quite anything, just a calibration of distance. "Delivery?" she said. "Sullivan Party, 32nd floor," Ethan said. He kept his voice level. "The order's under the company account. Hendricks something. I've got the confirmation here. That's for the freight elevator." She pointed toward a door to the left. "Deliveries go around back. You shouldn't be up here. The app sent me to the main lobby." The security desk downstairs said, "The freight elevator?" she repeated. He nodded. He turned back toward the elevator. He pressed the button. Behind him, the party continued as if he'd never arrived, a swell of laughter from a cluster of men in dark suits near the bar. The percussion of heels on polished concrete, the soft undertow of a string quartet in the far corner playing something Ethan recognized as Debussy but couldn't name. He'd known things like that once. He'd known a lot of things. The elevator didn't come. He pressed the button again. "Nice outfit." The voice came from his left, young, male, the particular brand of casual cruelty that came with a certain kind of security. One of the middle managers, Ethan guessed, based on the ID badge clipped to his lapel. The man's name badge read Delan Mercer. Operations lead. He was maybe 28, holding a champagne flute with the grip of someone who'd been taught to hold champagne flutes and hadn't forgotten he was performing the gesture. "Is the app doing a costume night?" Two of the men beside him laughed. One of them didn't, but he didn't say anything either. Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced down. The screen said Sophie and showed a small photo, a girl, 7 years old, dark-haired like her mother had been, gap-toothed and grinning from under a paper crown she'd made herself out of a cereal box. He declined the call. He'd call her back from the car. "I'm just making a delivery," he said. He didn't look at Dylan Mercer when he said it. "They really let anyone up here now," Dylan said to the group around him, not quite lowering his voice. "I had to badge in 5 times last month for a client presentation and this guy just walks off the elevator." More laughter. Ethan kept his eyes on the elevator numbers. He thought about Sophie. He thought about the way she said "bah" when she called a word she'd picked up from the daycare worker who'd watched her when she was 3 and had never fully let it go. He thought about how she'd asked him last week whether their apartment had a ceiling in the living room, because she'd been reading a book about houses with vaulted ceilings and wanted to know if they had one. He'd told her every ceiling is a ceiling, sweetheart. She'd accepted this with the gravity of a child who is filing the information away for future use. The elevator arrived. He stepped inside. He rode down to the loading dock, found the freight elevator, and took it back to 32. He found the conference room they'd ordered from a smaller, private dining space off the main atrium, set up for what appeared to be an executive dinner that had spilled out into the larger celebration. The table inside held the remnants of a catered meal and 6 people in various states of post-dinner loosening. ties pulled down, jackets draped over chairs, the comfortable slackness of people whose workday had shifted into something optional. He set the delivery bag on the serving table near the door and began unloading the secondary order boxed desserts, specialty coffees, something in a branded paper bag he couldn't identify. He worked quietly. He'd learned to be quiet in rooms like this. The spill happened because of the floor. The polished concrete, the kind that looked beautiful in architectural photographs and was genuinely treacherous when wet, had caught a tracked-in puddle near the door. His boot hit it wrong. His left hand grabbed for the edge of the serving table and missed. The delivery bag went sideways, not entirely, not catastrophically, but enough. One of the coffee cups lost its lid. Dark liquid spread across the serving table and dripped to the floor. The room went sharp and still. "Oh, you're kidding me." The man who spoke was older, 60s, the kind of silver-haired authority that came with a corner office and the habits of someone who'd had a corner office for 20 years. His jacket was still on. He was the kind of man who kept his jacket on. His name badge read Carter Hollis, VP Enterprise Solutions. "Are you serious right now?" "I'm sorry," Ethan said. He was already reaching for the napkins, already moving to contain it. "The floor caught me." "I'll cover any." "Cover it?" "You just do? You have any idea what's in those files?" Carter Hollis was pointing at a folder on the far edge of the table, nowhere near the spill, that had not been touched by anything. But the pointing was the point. The pointing was establishing jurisdiction. This is an executive briefing space. This isn't a, "You can't just come in here and the files are fine, Mr. Hollis." The voice came from the doorway. It was quiet. Not warm, not cold, just precise. The kind of voice that had learned to cost nothing and land everywhere. Everyone looked. She was standing in the door with one hand resting on the frame, the other holding a phone she'd stopped looking at. She wore a charcoal blazer over a silk top, the color of dark water. Her hair was pulled back not severely, but with the efficiency of someone who had made peace with efficiency. She was 35, maybe 36. She looked like she hadn't slept completely in several years and had decided this was fine. Her name was Victoria Ashford. She was the CEO. Her eyes moved from Carter Hollis to the spill to Ethan, and then they moved on a quick, clean assessment. She did not intervene further. She stepped into the room, exchanged something quiet with one of the others at the table, and sat down. Ethan cleaned up the spill. A server appeared from somewhere with fresh napkins. Carter Hollis made two more pointed comments about liability and professionalism, both directed at the air near Ethan rather than at Ethan directly. Ethan finished, collected his bag, and turned to leave. That was when Dylan Mercer walked in. He'd followed from the main atrium. Ethan could see it in the way he moved, the slight performance of it. He'd brought two colleagues. He was still holding the champagne flute. "Oh, he's still here," Dylan said. Bright, like he'd discovered something. "Did you drop anything else?" One of the men with him snorted. "Hey, nice badge," Dylan said. His eyes had caught on something. He reached out, quickly, before Ethan had registered the intention, and pulled the laminated badge from where it had been clipped, half-tucked, to the inside hem of Ethan's jacket. It had caught on the strap of the delivery bag when the bag slipped. Ethan hadn't noticed it had come loose. Dylan held it up. It was old, the laminate yellowed at the edges, the photo faded, the text on it small and worn. "Ethan Callaway," Dylan read, in the theatrical voice of someone reading a name they find inherently amusing. "Senior Engineer, Core Systems Architecture." He looked up. "Senior Engineer? You?" He looked at the others. Did they mix up the resume pile? The laughter came quickly. Even one of the people at the executive table glanced over. Ethan held out his hand for the badge. His face had not changed. "Can I have that back, please?" he said. "Core Systems Architecture," Dylan repeated, enjoying it. Victoria Ashford looked up from the document she'd been reviewing. She looked at Dylan briefly. She looked at the badge. Then she stood up. Dylan noticed her rising and began to wind down, the laughter trailing off, the flute coming down from its ironic elevation. He'd read the room. He was the kind of person who was very good at reading rooms once it was slightly too late. Victoria crossed the space between the table and the door in 10 steps. She held out her hand. Dylan placed the badge in it without making a sound. She looked at it. The room went quiet in the particular way of rooms where everyone has suddenly realized that the thing happening is not the thing they thought was happening. Victoria Ashford's hand tightened around the badge. Not dramatically, just slightly, the way a hand tightens when something lands. She looked up at Ethan. For a moment, neither of them said anything. "Calloway," she said. He didn't answer. "Ethan Calloway." She said it the second time differently, not reading it, not asking. Something in between. "Yes," he said. She looked at him, really looked at him, the way people rarely look at other people in professional settings, where eye contact has calibrated durations and purposes. She looked the way you look when you're recalibrating something you thought you'd filed away. "You should come with me," she said. Before he walked with her down the hall, before any of what happened next, "there is something you need to know about the badge." He'd been given it on his 3rd day. The company was called Meridian Systems then. It was 4 years before Victoria renamed it Ashford Technologies and moved the headquarters from a converted warehouse in the east side to the 32nd floor of a building with freight elevators and polished concrete floors. When Ethan joined, there were 22 employees, a seed round that had almost failed twice, and a product that worked but didn't scale. He was 29. He had a master's degree in computer science from a state university that had taken him 11 years to pay off. He had 3 job offers. He chose Meridian because of the problem, a distributed data verification system that the 2 founders, brothers named Grant and Russell Holt, had designed brilliantly at the theory level and catastrophically at the execution level. He spent 8 months rebuilding it, not redesigning, rebuilding. The architecture they had was like a house where someone had put the load-bearing walls in the wrong place and painted over the cracks. He had to go down to the studs. He worked 16-hour days, not because anyone asked him to, but because the problem was the kind of problem that keeps you up at night by being interesting rather than by being frightening, and he couldn't figure out how to leave it alone. Victoria was the operations director at the time. She was 28, and she had learned to be the smartest person in any room by being the most prepared person in any room. She'd been the one who'd seen the original pitch, found the early clients, built the processes that kept 22 people pointed in the same direction. She and Ethan met in the kitchen at 11 at night when she was reviewing projections, and he was eating a sandwich he'd made from whatever was in the communal refrigerator because he'd forgotten dinner. They talked about the architecture problem for 2 hours. She didn't have an engineering background, but she had the habit of understanding things completely or not at all, and she would not let a concept go until it made sense to her. They worked together for 2.5 years. He built the system. She built the company around the system. It was the kind of professional partnership that didn't happen often. Not romantic, not quite friendship, something with its own category. The particular bond of 2 people who trust each other's judgment in different domains and know, without speaking it, that they are building something real. Then the Holt brothers made a decision. They had an acquisition offer from a larger company, not to acquire Meridian outright, but to acquire the core architecture. The technology, essentially. The thing Ethan had built. The offer was contingent on the acquirer's team taking over development, which meant Meridian's engineering team would be redundant. It meant Ethan would be redundant. Grant Holt presented it as a business necessity. He used words like streamlining and strategic alignment. He said they would give Ethan a severance package and a strong reference letter. Ethan said he needed to think. He thought for 3 days. In those 3 days, his daughter developed a fever that climbed to 104.2 and wouldn't come down. He took her to the emergency room. The doctor said it wasn't the fever they were worried about, it was what the blood panel had shown. They needed to do more tests. The tests would take time and cost money, and he would need to not be at work. He went back to Grant Holt and said he couldn't sign the agreement. Not because of Sophie, that complication was still private, still unprocessed. He couldn't sign it because of what he'd found in the acquisition documents, a clause that would allow the acquiring company to use the architecture in a way that violated the data privacy agreements Meridian had made with its early clients. Small businesses, non-profits, a children's hospital in the East Side, people who had trusted the company with sensitive information because they'd been told it was protected. Grant Holt told him he was being difficult. Russell Holt told him he was being naive. They terminated his employment on a Thursday morning. His personal items were packed into a cardboard box by someone from HR, who apologized with the particular neutrality of someone following a process they did not design. He was walked to the elevator by a security guard who had always said good morning to him and who now stared at the middle distance. His badge was in the box. He hadn't noticed until he was in the parking lot, sitting in his car, the box on the passenger seat, the building reflected in his windshield. Victoria was in Portland for a client meeting. She didn't know until after. By the time she knew, the termination was signed, the non-disclosure was signed, and the acquisition was already in motion. She was operations director. She did not have the authority to reverse it. She tried anyway, went to Grant, went to Russell, went to the investors. The investors said it was a business decision. They said it quietly, in the way people say things they would prefer not to have on record. She called Ethan. He answered. She told him she was sorry. She told him she would fix it. He told her he was fine. He told her to take care of herself. He told her that what she was building was good, and she shouldn't let them ruin it. He went home to Sophie. He did not contact Victoria again. He moved twice in the following year. He changed his phone number once. He was not hiding. Exactly, he simply needed to move toward the thing that was in front of him, which was a sick child and an empty savings account and a stack of medical literature he was teaching himself to read, and away from the thing that was behind him, which was a version of himself that had trusted the wrong people in the right building. He kept the badge because it was in the box, and he put the box in the closet, and when he finally unpacked the closet 2 years later, he found it at the bottom and held it for a moment and thought, I was good at something, and put it back. The hallway she led him to was quieter, a long corridor off the executive suite, carpeted. The sound of the party reduced to a vibration behind 2 sets of glass doors. She turned on the lights in a small conference room. Resair LEDs, cool and flat. She set the badge on the table between them. She stood on the other side of it. You've been delivering food, she said. Among other things, he said. How long? About 1.5 years with this app. Before that, I was doing contract work, freelance systems, consulting, some private tutoring. I taught 3 university students to debug architecture-level problems for their final projects last semester. One of them got a distinction. Why didn't you? She stopped. Restarted. After what happened, you disappeared. I tried to find you. I had someone looking for you for almost 1 year. I moved, he said, a couple of times. Sophie? He looked at her. He hadn't expected her to remember the name. She's 7 now, he said. She's good. She made a crown out of a cereal box last week. Something moved across Victoria's face. Not pity, she had the kind of self-discipline that pity didn't get through easily. Something more like pain, and the specific pain of understanding something you had understood in the abstract and are now understanding in the concrete. Grant and Russell, she said. I know what you're going to say. They didn't just terminate you. They erased your contribution from the company records. The core architecture, they credited it to a team, an internal engineering team that didn't exist as a cohesive unit. There were patents filed. Your name isn't on any of them. He nodded. You knew, she said. I found out a few years later. I thought about it for a while. He was quiet for a moment. Sophie was sick for a long time. Not dangerously, once we got the right diagnosis and the right treatment. But it consumed most of what I had. I was focused on what was in front of me. And now? He picked up the badge. He turned it over in his hand. The photo on it showed a man who was the same person as him, but who looked rested younger in the specific way that people look younger before they understand certain things. I kept this because it reminded me that I was good at something, he said. Not as I wasn't carrying it around waiting for this moment. If that's what you're thinking, it was just in my jacket pocket. I'd forget, it was there for weeks at a time and then find it when I was reaching for something else. It felt like proof that something real had happened. That I was there. That the work existed. Victoria sat down. He sat down across from her. When I bought out the Holt brothers, she said slowly. 4 years ago, the first thing I did was restructure the IP documentation. I found the original commits, the version history from the first month through the acquisition. I found your name in every meaningful commit from the initial architecture build onward. She paused. The company you're standing in, the system that runs across 900 enterprise clients in 14 countries, the patent portfolio that was valued at $2.3 billion in last year's independent audit. She stopped. That is yours, Ethan, the foundation of it, the architecture that made everything else possible. That is yours. The rain on the glass had thinned to a mist. He said, I built it. It's not the same as owning it. No, she said, but it means something. In the main atrium, the party continued. Dylan Mercer was on his second champagne and his third telling of the delivery incident, the details adjusting slightly with each pass. The badge detail remained, it was too good to lose. His audience had thinned. People kept drifting. The way party audiences drift when the story has run its natural course and the teller has not noticed. Carter Hollis had returned to his position near the bar and was consulting his phone with the focused attention of a man who prefers not to have opinions about things that do not directly concern him. 3 of Victoria's direct reports, her chief technology officer, her head of legal, and her VP of people operations had noticed that she had left the executive dinner space and had not returned. They had sent a combined 4 messages to her assistant. The assistant had replied to each with, "She'll be back shortly." She was not, in the immediate sense, back shortly. In the conference room, Ethan was explaining. He had not intended to explain at length. He had intended to be brief, to accept or decline whatever was offered and drive home and collect Sophie from Mrs. Pellegrino and heat up whatever was in the refrigerator and watch the 30 minutes of television they watched together on Friday nights before she fell asleep on the couch. But Victoria asked questions, and the questions were the right kind, not building toward a narrative, but trying to understand, and he found himself speaking. He told her about the first year after the termination, the freelance work, which paid erratically, the medical bills, which did not. Sophie's diagnosis, a rare autoimmune condition that had taken 8 months to properly identify and required a treatment protocol that was expensive and ongoing and required consistent monitoring and the kind of scheduling, flexibility that traditional employment did not accommodate well. He told her about his ex-wife, Priya, who had left when Sophie was 2 and with whom he had not spoken in 4 years. He said this without particular emphasis. It was information. He told her about the apartment, 2 bedrooms, 1 wall of Sophie's room, covered in adhesive stars that glowed in the dark, 3 of which Sophie had named after dinosaurs. He told her about the systems consulting work, small companies, small rates, long payment cycles. Some of them had gone under before the invoice cleared. He had learned to ask for partial payment up front, which was a thing he had not known to do before, and which he now knew with the precision of someone who had learned it the hard way. He told her about the delivery work, not as apology, as information. He had run the numbers and found that the combination of delivery gigs and consulting, with the flexibility both provided, covered Sophie's expenses more reliably than any single traditional employment arrangement he'd been offered since the termination. His daughter needed consistent pickup at 3:15. She needed to be home for a video call with her specialist every second Wednesday at 4 p.m. She needed a parent who was reachable when the school called, which happened several times a month because Sophie had an extremely confident and creative relationship with institutional rules. Victoria listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You built your schedule around her," she said, "and you've been doing this for 6 years, more or less." He paused. "She's a good kid. She asks me hard questions and she laughs at my jokes even when they're not funny, which I think she does intentionally as a kindness, and she made me read the same chapter of the same book 400 times when she was 4, until I had it completely memorized." He stopped. He wasn't sure why he was telling Victoria this. "She's worth it," he said. "All of it. Every part." Victoria looked at the badge. She looked at him. "Come back to the floor with me," she said. She did not announce it immediately. That was what he expected, some grand gesture. A raised voice, a formal declaration from the center of the room. Victoria Ashford did not operate that way. She walked back into the main atrium, Ethan beside her, and crossed to where her 3 direct reports were gathered near the bar. She spoke to her CTO, a tall man named Marcus Webb, who had joined the company 3 years ago and had the professional disposition of someone who had been wrong about something important once and had spent every subsequent year being extremely careful. She spoke quietly. He listened. He looked once at Ethan, briefly, neutrally, and looked back at Victoria. "Pull the original architecture records," she said. "The version history from the Meridian era. Everything before the acquisition." She turned to her head of legal, a woman named Sandra Freitas, whose braid was the kind of immaculate that signaled she had learned never to look like she'd been caught off guard. "I need someone to look at the patent filings from the Holt acquisition period, specifically the attribution documentation." Sandra made a note without asking why. Victoria turned to address the room. She didn't raise her voice or move to the center. She simply let the room notice her, which it did, because rooms always noticed Victoria Ashford when she decided they should. "I want to say something before the evening ends," she said. The nearest clusters of people turned. The rest followed. This company was built on a foundation. Most of you know the version of that story that appears in our materials. The Meridian acquisition, the core architecture, the scaling phase that brought us to where we are tonight. She paused. "What most of you don't know, because the record was deliberately obscured before I had the authority to correct it, is who actually built that foundation." The room was quiet enough to hear the rain. She gestured, once, toward Ethan. "His name is Ethan Callaway. He was the senior engineer for core systems architecture at Meridian Systems. He designed and built, from nothing, the distributed verification architecture that is the technical foundation of everything we operate today. He was terminated before the acquisition closed improperly, and in a way that removed his name entirely from the record." She looked around the room without targeting anyone specifically. "He has been delivering food to support his daughter while we held events in the building that runs on what he built." The silence lasted long enough to be uncomfortable. Dylan Mercer set his champagne on a passing tray. He did not look up. Carter Hollis's jaw had the look of a jaw being held in position through sustained effort. Several people in the room, the younger ones, mostly, the ones who were here because they loved the work rather than because they'd maneuvered into a comfortable position, were looking at Ethan with an expression he didn't quite know how to receive. Not pity. Something closer to recognition. The specific recognition of people who know what it is to carry a skill through circumstances that don't reflect it. Marcus Webb crossed the room and extended his hand to Ethan. He did not say anything. He shook his hand. That was enough. They were back in the conference room. The party was winding down beyond the glass. Victoria had had her assistant signal the catering team quietly. Sophie had called again. Ethan had stepped out to the corridor and answered. He'd told her he'd be home by 10, that he had something he needed to finish first. Is it good or bad something? She'd asked. Good, I think, he'd said. Complicated good. Like a knot? Like a knot, he'd agreed. Okay, she'd said. Mrs. Pellegrino made pasta. She said to tell you she makes too much on purpose. Victoria placed a folder on the table between them when he came back in. It was thin, 2 or 3 pages. She pushed it toward him. This is not a contract, she said. I want to be clear about that. This is a preliminary outline of what I would like to propose. You have every right to take it away, have someone review it, and tell me no. He looked at the folder without opening it. What's in it? He said. A senior technical advisory role. The title is yours to negotiate, I'd suggest Chief Architecture Officer, but that's not a requirement and it's not the point. It's a position designed to give you core availability windows rather than fixed hours, because I'm not interested in designing something that doesn't work for Sophie's schedule. She paused. There's also a proposal for formal IP recognition, your name added to the original architecture patents, with appropriate attribution, and a retroactive licensing arrangement structured to reflect your contribution to what those patents are worth today. He looked at her. That's a significant legal undertaking, he said. Yes, she said. It is. The Holt brothers are not involved in this company. I completed the buyout in 2021. Their exit agreement contains a clause I had specifically drafted. It allows me to correct attribution records without their consent. She looked at him steadily. I drafted that clause specifically because I intended to correct the attribution records. He was quiet. You planned for this, he said. I planned for the possibility, she said. I didn't know when or how I'd find you. He turned the folder over in his hands without opening it. Outside, the rain had lightened to a fine mist. The city below was a grid of amber and white. The lights at street level blurred into soft, round shapes. I don't want a title, he said. She waited. I want to work on hard problems, he said. That's what I've always wanted. I don't need an office. I don't need a team reporting to me. I don't need to be in a room because I'm supposed to be in the room. I want to be in a room because there's something in the room worth solving. That's what I'm offering, she said. He looked at her. And I want to be home at 3:15, he said. That's a condition, not a request, she said. I'll have it written into the formal agreement. He held the folder. He still hadn't opened it. There's one more thing, he said. If I'm coming back, if I'm walking into this building and people are going to know who I am, I want something done with that. Not for me. He set the folder down on the table. There are a lot of people in this city doing what I've been doing. Delivering food, driving routes, doing piecemeal consulting, cutting their schedules into pieces so they can take care of a child or a parent or a sibling, people with skills that aren't visible because they're managing something invisible. He paused. I want a fund, a real one, not a marketing program, a fund that supports caregivers in skilled labor, emergency medical coverage, child care subsidies, professional development credits, people who have had to step off a track and need a way back on. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. You've thought about this, she said. For about 6 years, he said. She nodded once. She reached for the folder, opened it to the first page, and wrote something at the bottom with a pen from her blazer pocket. She turned it toward him. The Callaway Care Fund integrated into Ashford Technologies' CSR framework. Annual commitment minimum, $2M. Governance board to include external advocates, appointed by E. Callaway. He read it twice. Okay, he said. He opened the folder. He left the building at 10:43. The rain had stopped. The sidewalk was dark and wet, catching the red of a traffic light 2 blocks down and pulling it into a long, irregular smear across the concrete. His boots made the small sound of boots on wet pavement. He stood at his car for a moment before getting in the 2017 sedan with the dent in the rear quarter panel he'd been meaning to address, the air freshener that smelled more like the memory of pine trees than like actual pine trees, the rear seat that had a booster in it with Sophie's name written on the side in her handwriting, large and deliberate. He sat. He called Sophie. She answered on the second ring. He could hear the television in the background, Mrs. Pellegrino's shows, the ones with people in large houses making complicated decisions. Sophie was supposed to be in bed. "Hey," he said. "You're late," she said. "I'm in the car. I'm on my way." Was it the naughty thing? Yeah. Good naughty or bad naughty? He leaned his head back against the headrest and looked at the ceiling of the car for a moment. The overhead light was off. The only light came through the windshield from the street. "Good naughty," he said. "Mostly. Did you eat?" He hadn't eaten. He'd spent 3 hours delivering food and had not eaten. "I'll get something on the way home," he said. "Mrs. Pellegrino made pasta," Sophie said. "She always makes too much. She told me she does it on purpose." "Tell her I said thank you. Tell her I'll be there in 20 minutes. A pause. The television shifted the music that played between scenes on whatever program it was. "Bah?" she said. "Yeah. Are we going to be okay?" He reached into his jacket pocket. The badge was there. He'd put it back when he'd left the conference room, not as a statement, just because it was where it went. He held it for a moment without looking at it. He thought about the preliminary agreement in his jacket's inner pocket. He thought about Marcus Webb shaking his hand without saying anything. He thought about Sandra Freitas making a note on her phone without asking why. He thought about Victoria writing a number at the bottom of a page and the way she'd held the pen quickly, without hesitation. The way you write something you've already decided. He thought about Sophie's question from last week. "Do we have a ceiling?" Every ceiling is a ceiling, sweetheart. Some answers you give because they're true. Some you give because the full answer would take longer than the moment allows, and the simple one is good enough to hold the space until there's time to say the rest. "Yeah, Bug," he said. "We're going to be okay." He heard her settling back into whatever she was sitting on, the particular creak of their couch when she shifted. "Okay," she said, in the voice that meant she'd accepted this and was moving on. "Mrs. Pellegrino wants to know if you're allergic to garlic." "I'm not allergic to garlic. She puts a lot. Tell her that's good. Tell her that's great." "Okay." A pause. "Drive safe, Ba." "I will. Go tell Mrs. Pellegrino I'm on my way." He started the car. The official announcement came on a Monday, 6 weeks later. It was released as a company-wide memo, written by Victoria in her characteristic style. Precise, spare, without the corporate softening that usually cushioned communications that required no cushioning. 3 paragraphs. The first described the original architecture of Ashford Technologies' core verification system and its foundational role in the company's current operations and valuation. The second, named Ethan Callaway as the architect of that system, described the circumstances of his departure from Meridian Systems in 2018, and named what had been done to the record of his contribution. The third described the corrections being made, the patent attribution amendments, the chief architecture officer role, the establishment of the Callaway Care Fund, and noted that these corrections were not gestures, they were obligations. The memo did not use the word sorry. That was, perhaps, the most honest thing about it. An apology from an institution for a harm it committed is, at some level, a performance. What the memo offered instead was an accounting, a naming of what had happened, a naming of what was being done, and the clear implication that these were 2 separate things that did not erase each other. Dylan Mercer submitted his resignation before the memo reached all staff. It was accepted without a counteroffer. Carter Hollis requested a meeting with Victoria the same day the memo went out. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. He retired 4 months later, effective immediately, citing a desire to spend more time with family, a phrase that has always meant, in this context, exactly what it means. Sandra Freitas oversaw the patent correction process. It took 9 weeks. At the end of it, 23 patents carried the notation. Original architecture attributed to Ethan Callaway. Senior engineer, Meridian Systems, 2016, 2018. The notation was small, 3 lines of text in a legal document most people would never read. But it was in the record. It was there, permanently. Ethan came in on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and alternating Fridays. He sat in a corner of the engineering floor, not in an office, by his request, because offices had the particular problem of making people feel they needed to stop what they were doing and come to a room, which was not how good thinking worked. He had a standing desk, 2 monitors, and a whiteboard. Within his first 2 weeks, the whiteboard was covered in the kind of notation that made the junior engineers stop and photograph it on their phones when they thought he wasn't looking. He was home by 3:15. He was never not home by 3:15. On his first Thursday, one of the junior engineers, 23, recently graduated, the kind of nervous precision that came with very high ability, and an awareness of being young in a room of people who were not stopped him near the coffee station and said, "I read about the architecture in the original repository, the design decisions in the verification layer. I've been trying to understand the underlying logic for 2 years. Could I ask you about it sometime?" Ethan had poured his coffee. They sat for 40 minutes. He explained the logic, the trade-offs, the decisions that looked counterintuitive from the outside and made complete sense from the inside, once you understood what problem they were actually solving. She asked the right questions. She had the particular quality of someone who would not move past a concept until it was genuinely clear, which was the same quality Victoria had, and which was the quality that separated people who learned things from people who memorized them. When she left, she was holding 3 pages of handwritten notes and walking in the quick, contained way of someone who has been given something they need to immediately go process. He sat with his coffee for a moment after she was gone. The engineering floor was quiet at that hour, the natural light still coming in at the low angle of a morning that hadn't fully committed. The city below was working. Somewhere on the other side of it, Sophie was in school, probably negotiating with a rule she disagreed with, probably asking a question the teacher hadn't expected, probably writing her name in the large, deliberate letters she used when she wanted to make sure the letters lasted. He looked at the whiteboard. The notation on it was the beginning of something new, a refinement to the verification layer, a structural problem he'd identified in the first week that the current team hadn't found because they were too close to it. You can't see a pattern in a thing when you're inside the thing. He'd been outside for 6 years. Outside had given him a view that inside didn't have. He wasn't sure yet if that was a compensation for what had been taken or simply a different kind of knowing. He suspected both were true. He picked up the marker. He started writing. On a Friday morning, 10 weeks after the memo was released, the Callaway Care Fund held its first information session in the Ashford Technologies atrium. They had partnered with 3 community organizations to identify initial applicants, caregivers in skilled labor, who needed emergency medical coverage, or child care support, or professional development credits, or simply someone to look at the situation and say, "You have not fallen off the track. The track moved, and we are going to help you find where it went." Ethan spoke for 8 minutes. He was not a natural public speaker. He was clear and honest, and he did not perform emotion, which was its own kind of presence. He said that 6 years ago he had made a choice to prioritize his daughter, and that he did not regret the choice. He said that the choice had cost him things he had not anticipated losing, and had given him things he had not anticipated gaining. He said that the thing he had learned from the years between was that the skills you carry do not leave you when the position does. That the work you have done does not become undone when the record is altered, and that what looks like a detour from the outside can be, from the inside, the most direct path you could have taken. He said that was why the fund existed. Not to reverse what had happened, you could not reverse what had happened, but to reduce the cost of what people were currently carrying, and to make the way back shorter than it had been for him. In the 3rd row, his daughter was sitting next to Victoria Ashford. Sophie was wearing her school uniform and a paper crown she had made that morning from a piece of craft paper she'd folded and cut herself. She had written on it in the large and deliberate letters she used when she wanted something to last. "My dad built this." Victoria had noticed the crown approximately 4 seconds after Sophie sat down. She had looked at it for a moment, the paper, the lettering, the slightly uneven points of the crown where Sophie's scissors had made their own decisions. Then she had looked forward, at Ethan, at the room. She did not smile immediately. She was not a person who smiled immediately, as a rule, but she smiled. You can have the right skills, the right judgment, the right vision, and still lose the room. Not because you were wrong, not because you failed to try. Sometimes because the people with the authority to record what happened chose to record it differently. But the record is not the truth. The record is what someone decided to write down. The truth is, in the commits, the architecture, the systems still running clean across 900 clients in 14 countries, 6 years after the hands that built them walked out of the building with a box of personal items and a badge that ended up in a coat pocket. The truth is in a man who kept that badge not as a protest and not as a plan, but because it was proof that something real had happened, that he had been there, that the work existed. The truth is in a girl with a paper crown who knew exactly what her father had built and wanted him to know she knew. Don't judge a person by the bag they're carrying. You don't know what they built. There is a file in the Ashford Technologies server architecture, not publicly accessible, not listed in any marketing material, that contains the complete version history of the original Meridian Systems codebase. Every commit, every branch, every iteration, from the first unstable build to the final version that was handed to the acquiring company in the fall of 2018. The commit messages are technical. Most of them read like notes written by someone who was thinking faster than they were writing, shorthand, abbreviations, references that mean nothing without context. But if you read them in sequence, from the first to the last, a pattern emerges. Not just of the code of the thinking behind the code, the decisions being made and revised and refined, the logic being tested and the places where it failed and the ways it was rebuilt. Every commit is time-stamped. Most of them are between 8 p.m. and 2 a.m. Every commit carries the same author name, Callaway. Marcus Webb had found the file in his second week on the job, 3 years before the memo. He'd been doing a deep audit of the system's historical architecture, trying to understand why certain decisions had been made the way they'd been made. Decisions that were unusual enough to be interesting and effective enough to have been left alone for years. He'd found the version history. He'd read through the first 20 commits. He'd stopped and gone back to the beginning and read all of them. The way you go back to the beginning of something when you realize the ending only makes sense if you've understood where it started. He'd tried to find a Callaway through internal records. There were no internal records. The name appeared in the version history and nowhere else in any company system. No HR file, no email thread, no project documentation. He'd flagged it to Victoria. She'd asked him to keep it between them until she was ready to address it. He'd agreed, with the particular agreement of someone who understands that ready means something specific in this context and who trusts the person using the word. He'd never stopped thinking about those commit messages. The shorthand, the abbreviations, the notes written at midnight by a man who was thinking faster than he was writing. The evidence of a mind working on a problem it found genuinely interesting, leaving a trail not for anyone else to follow, but simply because the trail was part of the thinking. On the day of the announcement, Marcus had pulled the version history up on his secondary monitor. He'd read the first commit again. It was from October 2016, 11:47 p.m. The message read, "Initial architecture pass verification layer skeleton. Needs load testing. Will break. Fixing tomorrow." He'd looked at that for a moment. Will break. Fixing tomorrow. Not, this is done. Not, shipped. Just an honest accounting of where the work was and where it was going. Written by someone who was going home to sleep and would be back. He'd thought about that a lot in the weeks after the announcement. The honesty of it. The particular confidence of a person who is not afraid to say that something is incomplete because they already know what they're going to do next. He'd mentioned it to Ethan on his first Thursday, offhandedly, while they were both at the coffee station. Ethan had looked at him for a moment. "I remember writing that," he said. "I was eating a sandwich." The communal fridge had cheese and some leftover pasta salad someone had brought in. "I remember I was thinking about the load testing parameters and I wrote the commit message without really thinking about it, and then I went home." He paused. "I don't think I ever did go back and fix it the next day. I think I went back and found it had broken in a completely different way than I'd expected, and I had to rethink the whole approach." "That's when you moved to the distributed verification model," Marcus said, "instead of the centralized one." "Yeah, that's the decision. That's the one that made the whole thing work." Ethan looked at him. "I know. You broke it on purpose?" "I didn't break it on purpose. I broke it by accident, and then I realized the accident had shown me something the original design hadn't." He picked up his coffee. "That's usually how it goes. You plan the system, and then the system tells you what it actually needs." Marcus had thought about that for a long time after. The system tells you what it actually needs. He'd thought about it when he was approving the fund documentation, and when he was reviewing the patent correction filings, and when he was watching Ethan at the whiteboard on his second week, writing something new over the old notation, building something from where the current architecture needed to go. And he thought about it on the Friday morning of the information session, watching a man in a charcoal blazer who did not perform a motion talk to a room full of people about what the years between had cost and what they had given, and watching a 7-year-old girl in a paper crown sit straight in her chair in the third row, listening to every word. The system tells you what it actually needs. Sometimes the system is a company. Sometimes it is a family. Sometimes it is a man standing in a freight elevator in a jacket that is no longer waterproof, carrying a delivery bag, with a badge in his pocket that carries the name of something he built. Sometimes the system breaks in the place you least expect, and that is where the real architecture begins.